Do you have to push your body to extremes to maximize training outcomes? Do we always have to go on to beast mode all the time? Well, this is what the prevailing wisdom suggests. If you want to maintain your fitness, you must push yourself every workout, and the same is the case for growing muscles. But I cannot train too hard all the time. You might ask, well, what if we say that this is not even essential? What if, instead of benefits, they prove to be counterproductive? If that's the case, pushing your body beyond limits can make things worse. So, what should you do? How can you effectively determine the border between overtraining and undertraining? Well, in this video, we are uncovering how you can estimate proximity to failure through the effective use of the RPE scale. We will explain what the RPE scale is, how it can help you, and how you can track your effort using it. We will cover the use of different RPE scales in endurance training as well as resistance training such as powerlifting. Let's get started. First things first, what is RPE? Short for the rate of perceived exertion, RPE simply tells you the intensity of the physical exercise you did. Instead of just describing the feeling in words, RPE gives a numerical scale designed for trainees to track their training efforts during weight training or aerobic training. But one thing should be noted, RPE scores are subjective, self-evaluated, and largely based on how you're feeling at the end of a set. Using RPE scores requires good body awareness by the athlete, but this can be achieved easily with practice and experience. So how did RPE scales come about? Interestingly, the early version of the RPE scale was developed to measure the fatigue level of marathoners. It was called the Borg Rating of Perceived Exertion Scale, named after the Swedish scientist who created it, Gunnar Borg. Borg's scale ranged from 6 to 20, with 6 corresponding to no exertion and 20 meaning maximal effort. Number 7 represented barely any effort and fatigue. Perhaps, when you watch a video as you are watching now, you fall on this level. 8 represents very light exercise, 11 shows light, while 13 shows somewhat challenging exercise. It's 15 when athletes start to strain their foreheads because exercise becomes challenging. At 17, exercise is highly challenging, while at 19, Gunnar Borg says it's near maximal effort. It's the 20 where everything is breaking level, representing maximal effort. But you might wonder why the scale goes from 6 to 20 instead of 1 to 10. The reason is interesting. It is because each value loosely corresponds to a specific heart rate. More specifically, multiplying each value by 10 would give you a rough estimate of your heart rate, which is an excellent indicator of cardiovascular exertion. For example, if you're cycling on a stationary bike and your session feels light, your heart rate will likely be between 100 and 120 beats per minute. As time passed and we had some research on heart rate variability, Borg decided to revamp his scale, which led him to develop the modified RPE scale that goes from 1 to 10. Unlike the 6-20 scale, the modified version is much easier to understand and apply. It isn't based on heart rate, but still aims to help high-level athletes manage their fatigue, at least in the context of aerobic exercise. Like his original scale, the new one measures subjective feelings of fatigue, where 1 means barely any exertion, and 10 corresponds to extreme fatigue and the impossibility of doing more work. But what's the most common RPE scale used today? What RPE are used in the context of resistance training? It wasn't long until someone took Borg's scale and modified it further to fit trainees in the context of resistance training. That person was Dr. Mike, an IPF world champion powerlifter and a renowned powerlifting coach. He first introduced a different rate of perceived exertion scales for resistance training, which is determined based on how many more repetitions a trainee believes they could have done. 1 to 4 on this scale represents very light training and barely any effort. Between 5 and 6, the athlete feels they could get 4 to 6 more repetitions. While at 8, it means the athlete thinks they could definitely do 2 more repetitions. If it's at 8.5, it implies that the athlete could maybe do 2 more. 9.5 is the point where things start to break, and an athlete cannot do any more repetition but can lift slightly more weight. That ends at 10, where no repetitions can be done and no weight can be added. But one thing should be noted, the scale is also based on subjective feelings of fatigue, which means it takes experience to use effectively. The rating depends on how you define the activity, but you cannot say you are at 10 when you cannot do any repetition in the morning because you are just feeling tired. That's abuse. Here's a little reminder to like the video if you are enjoying the content. And if you want to learn more about health and fitness, subscribe to our channel. Let's continue now. RPE is a tool you should add to your toolbox to improve your training. It doesn't have to be complex and shouldn't feel overwhelming. As with most things, practice makes perfect. Using RPE becomes particularly important for more advanced trainees who need to learn fatigue management if they hope to progress. The weight often becomes much heavier than their body weight, so the training stress is larger and needs to be managed more effectively. Here is another table helps the RPE scale become more objective rather than a subjective scale. RPE tracking and fatigue management became quite popular after Dr. Mike came up with the RPE to reps table. This table is far more actionable and can be a great starting point for people without experience relying on subjective factors when estimating their RPE. It includes RPE figures to guide you further and help you determine your effort level. But you should note that using the table for up to 12 reps per set is best, as the table values tend to be more accurate for heavy strength lifts. Anything higher than that becomes too difficult to track accurately, and even this table comes with limitations as there are individual variances in the values. But what if you are still having problems? If you're struggling to estimate your maximum strength and put these numbers into practice, you can use one of the many available formulas. An example is Boyd-Epley's, where you have to multiply 0.033 by the number of repetitions and weight. After you do so, add the weight to the total. Let's say that you can bench press 135 reps for 15 reps. The equation would look like so. But wait for a second, why should athletes utilize RPE in their training routine? Old, dogmatic ideas suggest athletes should push themselves to their limits to optimize progression. But as research and practical experience develop, we've come to understand that fatigue management is a crucial piece of the puzzle. Maintaining a submaximal intensity, aiming for an RPE of 7 to 9, is generally ideal for everyday fitness enthusiasts. Frankly, we don't have to go for 10 to impress bystanders, right? Those submaximal effort levels are enough to cause a significant training stimulus without leading to excessive fatigue or putting athletes at risk of injuries. As a result, supercompensation is more likely to occur, leading to optimal progression. Research also supports this line of thinking. For example, in one recent review, researchers sought to determine the effectiveness of RPE during resistance exercise. The authors considered 118 studies and included 75 of them in their meta-analysis. We will read what the authors precisely said. They said, RPE provides a valid measure of exercise intensity and physiological exertion during resistance exercise, with effect sizes comparable to or greater than those shown during aerobic exercise. Therefore, RPE may provide an easily accessible means of prescribing and monitoring resistance exercise training. Of course, these findings don't paint a complete picture because, as discussed, RPE relies on subjective feelings, and trainees need the experience to apply the scale in their training. For example, in one paper, researchers examined perceived exertion and self-selected training loads and how these differ when the participants are told what training to do. The subjects were 19 untrained women. According to the paper's findings, the participants couldn't accurately measure their effort level or train at a high enough intensity to stimulate meaningful strength and hypertrophy improvements. With those findings in mind, what are the benefits and trade-offs we have when we use RPE in our training? Tracking RPE is a simple but profound habit that elevates training performance, leading to better results. Athletes using RPE often report that the scale helps them auto-regulate their progress and make their training more purposeful. As a result, they are less likely to lose motivation due to fears of becoming overtrained. In addition, research shows that RPE tracking is a fantastic way to manage training efforts and limit fatigue accumulation. For these reasons, many powerlifters, bodybuilders, and everyday gym-goers leverage RPE to manage their training plans. Regardless of the workout approach, RPE is a scale that works as intended, so long as trainees put effort into learning to gauge their level of exertion. But what about beginners? How can they leverage RPE principles? As we said before, the RPE scale works excellently for trainees of all levels, but beginners might struggle to use the scale. Newbie lifters who aren't good at measuring their RPE could utilize the principle of monitoring proximity to failure on every set by using a slightly different method. One option is the reps in reserve scale, similar to RPE but limited to 5 instead of 10 points. The reps in reserve scale was found to be indeed a useful tool to regulate training methods by research. Therefore, we recommend a bodybuilding RIR scale for novice lifters that is simpler than a 10-point RPE scale. Before diving into further practical recommendations, it's important to reiterate that the RPE scales of 10 or RIR scales of 5 are both largely subjective, and athletes must monitor perceived fatigue after each set while sticking closely to their well-structured workout plan. We must also understand that there are individual variances in how one perceives their RPE, depending on their training status and characteristics such as gender. For example, women usually rate their sets with a higher RPE than men. We saw such effects in one of the studies reviewed above, and there were other studies where researchers compare perceived fatigue levels between men and women show similar results. Despite having the same RPE scale for the two biological sexes, we recommend that females push themselves a bit more, say 0.5 points on their RPE. If a set feels like an RPE of 8, they could perceive it as 7.5. In contrast, some men might consider overestimating their efforts slightly to manage their effort and fatigue. If a set feels like an RPE 8, they could log it as RPE 8.5. So the RPE scales have such individual variances. What can we do about it? While we recommend most beginner and intermediate lifters use the default RPE to reps table to start using RPE and improve their body awareness during training, we recommend that experienced and elite lifters make minor adjustments and build their custom RPE to reps table for their training based on their previous training records. One helpful option is for athletes to use certain common benchmarks, such as their 1RM, 5RM, and 10RM, on specific exercises to establish anchor points. Doing so would provide a foundation for each athlete's table, and the remaining sections can be filled up by referring to the changes imposed in the standard RPE to reps table. It's worth reiterating that previous records of top sets are crucial in making a reliable RPE to reps table. Lower effort sets can also be useful, but leaving 2, 3, or even 4+ reps in the tank makes it difficult to determine your actual RPE. Finally, we recommend that athletes change their RPE to reps table every time they finish a training program. Perhaps they can do so every 3 to 6 months. Refining the table as you go is a great way to make it more accurate and leverage RPE better. Still, you should avoid making frequent alterations because day-to-day performance fluctuations are expected, and you might make too many unnecessary changes. We have come to the end of our video, and here are the key takeaways. For 1, RPE or RIR are effective and proven methods to improve your training outcome by avoiding overtraining or undertraining. For 2, RPE and RIR scales come with limitations as they are subjective, self-evaluated, and have large variances across different individuals. For 3, if you are a beginner athlete, you could try using RIR scales for your exercise sets. For 4, if you are an intermediate or advanced athlete, you should use RPE scales for your exercise sets. Lastly, if you are an advanced or elite athlete, we recommend you use RPE with your own RPE to reps table by using estimation formulas or your previous training data. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel right now by clicking on the subscribe button below. Also, visit our website to find out more about the Strongineering app that generates highly effective workout programs that would be individualized end-to-end and makes workout tracking easy and efficient. What do you think? Can you use the RPE scale to optimize your training instead of pushing your body to its limits? Share your thoughts in the comments section right below. For more information on our recommendation, subscribe to our channel for more videos and visit our website to learn more about our training framework.